On Mother's Day, my son stood in the middle of the restaurant, gave his mother-in-law a $13,000 cruise package, and told her how much she meant to the family. Everyone clapped. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a wrinkled piece of paper and tossed it across the table toward me. A Powerball ticket. He said for fun. No card, no hug, just a grin and a few awkward chuckles from around the table. I looked at the ticket in my lap. I looked at my son, and I said nothing. Because sometimes silence is the only response you have left when words don't matter anymore. But what happened after that quiet moment? Well, that changed everything, and not just for me. Mother's Day used to be my favorite day of the year, not because of the gifts or the fuss, but because for one day I allowed myself to feel seen, not just as someone's mother, but as a woman who gave her all and hoped it still meant something. This year I had spent the whole week preparing. I scrubbed the floors until they gleamed, polished the old oak dining table, and laid out my floral china set, the one we only used on special occasions. I even baked Nathan's favorite lemon pie from scratch, just the way his late father used to like it. The house smelled like butter and cinnamon, and the gardenias I picked from the backyard framed the window with soft white blooms. I wanted everything to feel warm, welcoming. It had been years since we'd all sat down for a proper meal together. Nathan and Madison had been busy. There was always a work thing, a school thing, a travel plan. And Victoria Madison's mother had recently moved into the city, which meant more shared holidays. When they walked in, I greeted them with a hug, ignoring the faint smell of expensive perfume and the quick glance Madison gave the living room, as if measuring how small it felt. Victoria wore a cashmere cardigan and pearls, her smile wide and practiced. She kissed my cheek and said, "What a cozy little home you have, Evelyn." The word little hung in the air longer than it should have. Dinner went well enough. Madison mostly talked to her mother, sharing updates about their trip to Napa, the new renovations in their kitchen, and Jake's tennis coach. Nathan chimed in here and there, but mostly stayed quiet, fiddling with his phone between bites. I tried to steer the conversation to something we could all enjoy, but the topics always drifted back to things I couldn't relate to. After dessert, just as I began to gather the plates, Nathan stood up and said, "Wait, Mom. Got you something." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small slip of paper. It was a Powerball ticket. He dropped it on the table with a grin. "Happy Mother's Day. If you win, remember half of it's mine." I blinked at him. "Oh, it's a joke, Mom. Lighten up." He laughed, nudging Madison. Madison rolled her eyes with a little chuckle, then turned to her own mother. "Now for your gift, Mom." She reached beneath her chair and retrieved a glossy white box tied with a silk ribbon. Victoria gasped softly as she opened it and pulled out a folder with cruise tickets printed on heavy stock. "A 2-week Caribbean cruise," Madison announced proudly. "All expenses paid. Balcony suite. We thought you deserved something unforgettable." "Oh, darling," Victoria gushed, holding her hand to her chest. "You shouldn't have. I wanted to. You've done so much for us, helping with Jake's school interviews, those charity events. You're amazing." My hands had gone still on the table. The $2 ticket felt like it was burning a hole in front of me. I picked it up and stared at it. The ink still sharp, the numbers arranged in hopeful little rows. $2. The same amount I used to give Nathan when he was a boy to buy candy at the gas station on the way home from school. "Well," I said, forcing a smile, "thank you, Nathan. That was very thoughtful." Victoria leaned over to glance at the ticket. "Powerball? You never know. Could be your lucky day, Evelyn." Her voice was sweet but carried the slightest edge of amusement. Nathan chuckled. "Mom's luck is legendary. Remember when she won a turkey at the church raffle in '98? That brought a polite round of laughter, and then conversation moved on. But I was no longer part of it. I watched them talk, the way Madison rested her hand on her mother's arm, the way Nathan deferred to her with small affectionate nods. There was a warmth there, a kind of reverence that I hadn't felt directed toward me in years. I thought of the overtime hours I used to work at the school cafeteria, the nights I stayed up hemming pants and making sure Nathan had everything he needed for college. I thought about the sacrifices I made, The vacation I never took, the new car I never bought, the shoes I wore until they cracked. Because I believed being a good mother meant putting everyone else first. But sitting there, I felt like a placeholder. Like I was invited out of obligation, handed a token gift so no one could say I wasn't acknowledged. Meanwhile, the real affection, the real admiration was reserved for someone else. After they left, the house fell into silence. I stood by the window watching their SUV back out of the driveway. Madison waved cheerfully from the passenger seat. Victoria was still smiling, the cruise folder nestled in her lap. I looked down at the ticket still resting in my palm. $2. Nathan hadn't even handed it to me. He tossed it like it didn't matter whether I caught it or not. I sat back at the table now, cluttered with empty dishes and half-finished glasses of wine. I picked up my wine and sipped slowly, letting the silence settle around me like a shawl. Then I gently placed the ticket between the salt and pepper shakers, folded my napkin, and closed my eyes. There were no tears, just a quiet ache. A realization not of loss, but of clarity. I had been giving all my love, all my effort, all my energy into a space that no longer saw it as valuable. I was tolerated, not treasured, and that hurt more than I expected. Later that night, I placed the Powerball ticket on the kitchen counter. I didn't throw it away. Not yet. I wasn't sure why. Maybe some part of me still wanted to believe in tiny miracles. Or maybe I just wasn't ready to let go of even the smallest sign that I still mattered. I went to bed in silence, my heart heavier than it had been in a long time. I didn't sleep much. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, thinking about how easily we teach ourselves to expect less. How quietly we learn to swallow disappointment, how invisibility doesn't arrive in a moment, but creeps in softly over years. And yet, deep down, something stirred. Not anger, not even sadness, resolve, quiet calm and waiting. I didn't know it then, but that little slip of paper, the one tossed at me with a joke, would be the beginning of everything. Not because of what it held, but because of what it revealed. And what I would choose to do next. The next morning, I woke up early before the sunlight touched the curtains. Something didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just the ache in my chest from last night's dinner. It was something deeper, like a quiet nudge telling me to check to be sure. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. It had become routine over the years to check my bank account every Sunday morning. After my husband passed, I'd been meticulous about finances, every dollar tracked, every transaction reviewed. It wasn't just habit, it was a form of survival. I logged in, scrolling through the usual line items. Utilities, groceries, my recent grocery order for the Mother's Day dinner. Then my eyes landed on something that didn't belong. A charge for $13,482.72 from a luxury travel agency I had never heard of. At first, I thought it must be a mistake, maybe a scam, maybe someone had hacked my account. I clicked into the transaction details and my breath caught. The date showed it had been booked the Thursday before Mother's Day, the same day Madison and Nathan had surprised Victoria with her cruise. No, I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew. And as I sat there staring at that number on the screen, my heart began to pound. Not with fear, but with something closer to betrayal. I reached for my phone and called Nathan. He picked up after a few rings, his voice groggy. "Hey Mom, everything okay? I just checked my account," I said as calmly as I could. "There's a charge from Premier Escapes. A cruise." "Did you?" There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. "Oh, that," he said. "Yeah. We booked that for Victoria. You know the cruise we gave her last night. Madison said it was on a special rate. We had to act fast. You used my account, Nathan." "Well, yeah. I mean, you've always told me to use it in case of emergencies or family needs." I went silent for a moment. "That was years ago when your father passed away. For emergencies, this was a gift, an expensive gift." "She's done so much for us," he replied, a defensive edge creeping into his tone. She helped us get Jake into that private school covered for us during the refinance. And I'm your mother, I interrupted more sharply than I intended. I raised you. I helped you through college. I've never taken a penny from you, Nathan. He sighed as though I was the one being difficult. Look, Mom, it's not like you needed the money. It was just sitting there. You live modestly and it's not hurting you. Those words landed like a slap. Not hurting me. As if that justified it. I didn't give you permission, I said. My voice was firm now. You didn't ask. You didn't even mention it. And instead you handed me a $2 lottery ticket like some sort of joke. That's not fair, he said. We thought it'd be fun. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Am I whispered. I ended the call before he could respond. I sat there, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the kitchen. I hadn't cried yet. Not from last night, not from this morning. But the ache had grown deeper, heavier. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about what it represented. It was about how easily I had become invisible. When my husband passed away, Nathan was devastated. I stepped in and helped where I could, financially, emotionally, in all the little ways that mothers do when life tries to split their families apart. I never thought I'd have to ask for consideration. I thought that love earned over a lifetime came with mutual respect. But I was wrong. I stood up slowly, poured the rest of my coffee down the sink, and reached into the drawer where I kept my old financial files. I called the bank first, requested a new login, new cards, full revocation of Nathan's access. The agent on the line was kind, though her voice betrayed a slight note of surprise when I told her my son had used my account without asking. Then I called my lawyer, Grant Turner. He'd helped me with my husband's estate and had always been patient and thorough. I just want to make sure everything is secure, I told him. I need a full review. Beneficiaries, powers of attorney, all of it. He didn't ask questions, just said, come in Monday morning. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. It was fragile, like something new that hadn't found its footing. But it was there. The Powerball ticket was still on the kitchen counter, slightly curled at the edges. I looked at it now, not as a potential jackpot, but as a symbol. A placeholder for the moment. I realized I had to stop waiting for someone to choose me, to value me, to treat me with the dignity I'd long given to others. I slid it into the drawer beneath the silverware and closed it softly. I didn't care about it. Not really. It was just a scrap of paper. That evening, Edith stopped by. She always had a sixth sense for when something wasn't right. I told her everything. Not just about the money, but about how I felt sitting at that table the night before. About the cruise, the ticket, the silence. She didn't say I'm sorry. She didn't try to sugarcoat anything. She just took my hand and said, "You don't deserve that." And I believed her. That night I made a list. Nothing fancy, just scribbles on a notepad. Things I wanted to do for myself. Not big life-changing dreams. Just small, forgotten things. Like repainting the porch. Finding that old poetry book I loved. Planting marigolds in the front yard again. I was tired of being the afterthought. I was tired of being the wallet, the babysitter, the person who filled the space, but no longer held meaning. So I made a decision. I would live the next chapter of my life with intention. Not out of resentment, but out of self-respect. And if that meant saying no more often, so be it. If it meant pulling back from people who didn't see me, didn't really see me, then I would. And if it meant that $2 ticket was the last joke anyone tried to play on me, I'd make sure of it. Because from that moment on, I was done waiting to be invited into the lives of people who had already shown me the door. Edith came over that evening like she always did when things felt off in the air. We'd been friends for more than 30 years, through our kids' awkward school plays, through cancer scares and retirement parties, through births and funerals, and everything between. I didn't have to say a word for her to know something was wrong. But that night I did talk. I needed to. We sat on the porch, the evening air still warm from the sun that had finally begun to slip behind the horizon. I handed her a glass of iced tea and she waited patiently as I gathered my words. It was the way he tossed it, I said after a long silence. The ticket. Just tossed it across the table like I was a stranger they had to remember out of obligation. Edith didn't speak right away. She rarely did. That was her gift. She made room for the silence, for your words to arrive in their own time. They gave Victoria a cruise, I continued. A whole Caribbean cruise. With my money, by the way. And I got a $2 Powerball ticket. I laughed, but it didn't sound right. It cracked midway and fell quiet. "Sweetheart," she said finally, her voice soft, "I know it hurts. But I also know this isn't just about the ticket." She was right. Of course she was. It wasn't about the ticket, not really, not even the cruise. It was everything that came before. The quiet assumptions. The last-minute plans where I was always the backup option. The favors asked but never returned. The holidays I spent alone because they were too busy with Madison's family. The way Nathan had started looking at me like I was a duty rather than a joy. "You've spent your whole life giving," she said, "and somewhere along the way you forgot that you were allowed to receive too." That sat heavy in my chest. Because the truth was, I didn't know how to ask. I had been so focused on being what everyone needed, mother-wife support system safety net, that I forgot to need anything for myself. "I thought it would be different," I whispered. "When I was younger, I believed if I loved hard enough, if I gave without asking, then it would come back to me. I believed that's what being a good mother meant." Edith reached over and took my hand. "Being a good mother doesn't mean becoming invisible." The porch light flickered on above us. Moths danced in its glow, drawn to something that offered more warmth than the darkness around them. I looked down at our hands. Hers, weathered but strong, mine trembling in ways I didn't want to admit. "He used my account without asking," I said. "Over $13,000. And when I called him on it, he made me feel like I was being petty, said it was just sitting there." "That's not okay," she said firmly. "I know, but the part that hurts more is that he didn't even think it was wrong. Like I don't matter anymore. Like I'm just there. Something to use, not to cherish." We sat in silence for a while. The kind of silence that comes with decades of friendship where nothing needs to be filled, just felt. Finally, Edith stood and walked inside. A moment later, she returned with the Powerball ticket from my kitchen drawer. "What are you going to do with this?" she asked, holding it gently between two fingers. I stared at it. That thin strip of paper. That joke of a gift. That insult wrapped in a smirk. I reached out, took it from her, and looked at the numbers again. Neat little rows that were never meant to mean anything. "I'm going to do what they did," I said quietly. "Treat it like it doesn't matter." And I stood, walked to the edge of the porch, and crumpled the ticket in my hand. It felt thin, fragile, like the last thread of hope I hadn't realized I'd been holding on to. I dropped it into the small metal trash bin by the steps. The sound it made, soft, barely a thud, still echoed in my chest. "I'm tired of pretending this doesn't hurt," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm tired of acting like I'm okay with being forgotten, like it's noble to just endure." Edith nodded, her eyes damp. "Then don't. You don't have to keep shrinking just to keep their comfort intact." We sat in silence again after that, this time with something new between us. Something stronger than pain. Maybe it was the beginning of acceptance. Or maybe it was simply me waking up to my own worth. Later that night after she left, I walked through the house with the lights off. The moonlight cast silver shadows across the living room floor. I looked at the photos on the wall. Nathan at his high school graduation, our wedding anniversary from years ago, family holidays frozen in frames. So much of my life was there. Pieces of myself I'd given away. Smiles I had worn even when I was breaking. sacrifices I had folded neatly into casseroles and care packages and handmade cards. But where was I now? I returned to the porch and sat alone, the air cooler now wrapped in a sweater and the ache of realization. Somewhere between being a mother and a wife and a provider, I had lost sight of Evelyn. Not the title, the woman. And for what? For a son who no longer saw me, for a daughter-in-law who viewed me as an inconvenience, for a life that had become more about endurance than joy. That night I promised myself something simple. No more shrinking, no more swallowing pain for the sake of keeping peace. No more silence. I didn't know what that would look like yet. But I knew what it wouldn't look like. It wouldn't be a woman handing over her dignity in exchange for a seat at a table where she was no longer welcomed. I went inside, poured the remaining tea down the sink, and stood for a long moment in the kitchen's quiet. Then, slowly, deliberately, I pulled the crumpled ticket back from the trash. Not because I wanted to save it, but because I needed to remember. Not what it could have been, but what it taught me. It was just after 10 p.m. when I turned on the TV that night, not out of interest, but more out of habit. The house had gone quiet, and I wasn't ready to sit alone in that silence again. I thought maybe a cooking show or a late-night comedy rerun would dull the ache that still lingered after the Mother's Day dinner, after the bank account betrayal, after the voice in my head kept whispering, "You don't matter to them anymore." But instead of laughter or recipes, the screen flickered into a bright red and blue graphic Powerball. The numbers were being announced in cheerful tones, bouncing white balls rolling across the screen in front of a live audience. The announcer's voice echoed, "Tonight's winning numbers are 7, 14, 23, 35, 42, and Powerball 18. I froze. There was a pause in my breath. My mind caught each number, repeated them to myself like a prayer. Not because I expected anything, but because they sounded so familiar. No, it couldn't be. I walked slowly into the kitchen, every part of me tense. The trash bin stood in the corner. It hadn't been emptied yet. I stared at it, a strange pull tightening in my stomach. I remembered exactly what I had done. After Edith left, after we had talked it through, I had gone outside and dropped the ticket into the small bin by the porch steps. Later that night, in a moment of absent-mindedness, I had scooped the porch trash into the kitchen bin along with some of the dinner leftovers. It had to still be there. I didn't even bother with gloves. I pulled the bag out, placed it on the floor, and began digging. Soggy napkins, an apple core, a torn envelope, coffee grounds, wet paper towels, greasy foil. My hands shook as I rummaged, and at one point I almost stopped, thinking this is ridiculous. It's just a $2 ticket, a gag gift, a joke. But something deeper pushed me forward. Then there it was. Crumpled, bent, nearly in half, smudged with coffee, but still legible. The ticket. I smoothed it gently against the countertop. My hands were damp, my breathing unsteady. I reached into the drawer and grabbed a notepad, scribbled down the numbers I had heard just minutes before. 7, 14, 23, 35, 42, Powerball 18. I held the ticket up next to it. Match, match, match. All of them. My knees gave out, and I had to lean on the counter for support. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a prank or a pity present or a forgotten moment. It was a winning Powerball ticket. And I had just become a multimillionaire. I didn't scream. I didn't dance around the kitchen. I didn't even smile. I just stood there, letting the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. $200 million. $200 million from a gift that was never meant to be meaningful. From a child who had tossed it at me without thought. From a moment that was supposed to be humiliating. I slid the ticket into a clean envelope, sealed it, and tucked it into the safe I kept hidden in the hallway closet. The one with our old insurance documents and my husband's wedding ring. Then I went upstairs, changed out of my stained clothes, and sat on the edge of my bed in silence. I didn't sleep. I just sat thinking. By morning, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to tell Nathan, or Madison, or Victoria. I wasn't going to breathe a word of this to anyone until I had protected myself first, not because I was angry, though part of me was, but because I knew that people treated you very differently when money was involved, especially the kind of money that makes headlines. I called Grant Turner, my attorney, at 9:01 a.m. sharp. "Evelyn," he greeted. "It's good to hear from you. I need to schedule an appointment. Today, if possible." "Of course. Is everything all right?" "I think I just became very, very rich," I said, voice steady, "and I want to make sure I stay safe." Grant was silent for a beat, then said, "I'll clear my 11 a.m. for you." By the time I walked into his office, I had my envelope tucked carefully into a zippered pouch. He closed the door, locked it behind us, and motioned for me to sit. "I haven't claimed it yet," I told him. "But I checked. The numbers match. I watched it live." He leaned forward. "Do you have the ticket?" I handed him the envelope. He opened it carefully, eyes scanning the paper, his brows lifting slightly. "It's real," he said, "and it looks like it hasn't expired or been damaged enough to void it. You're within the redemption window." I nodded, my hands folded in my lap. "I want to do everything anonymously if that's possible. I don't want this to change my life in ways I can't control." He tilted his head. "It will change your life, Evelyn. But the question is, do you want to change how you live, or how you're treated?" I thought about that. I didn't want a bigger house or fancy cars or jewelry. I didn't want recognition or magazine features or to suddenly become everyone's favorite relative. I just wanted freedom. I wanted peace. I wanted the ability to say no without guilt. To not worry if I'd be okay in 10 years. To live the rest of my life on my terms without constantly being seen as less than, because I didn't earn, like them, dress like them, or exist for their convenience. We discussed trusts, financial advisors, setting up a new identity through a blind trust, and all the layers of protection I'd need. "I also want to change my will," I said quietly. Grant looked up. "All right. Anyone in particular you'd like to remove?" "I'd like to remove Nathan," I said without hesitation. "And Madison. I'll draft a new list." He didn't judge me. He just nodded. "We can do that." After our meeting, I walked back to my car and sat inside for a few minutes, staring at the steering wheel. The sun had come out, warming the windshield. I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because of the money, but because of the clarity. I wasn't doing this out of revenge. I wasn't cutting Nathan out because he hurt me. I was simply choosing for once to protect myself, and to protect the parts of me that were still healing from years of quiet disrespect. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I thought about that Powerball ticket, the one they tossed my way like a joke, the one that changed everything. They'd meant to dismiss me with it, but what they gave me instead was a new beginning. The first few days after confirming my winnings were quiet, exactly how I wanted it. I moved carefully, discreetly. Grant filed all the paperwork through the blind trust, and I worked closely with him and a financial planner to set up layers of protection just like we'd discussed. I didn't tell anyone, not even Edith. Not yet. I needed time to think, to breathe, to feel like this gift, this unbelievable shift in fortune, was actually mine. But secrets have a way of leaking. On the 5th morning, just after I finished my coffee, I got a call from Edith. Her voice was low and urgent. "Have you seen Facebook today?" I didn't use it much anymore. "You need to," she said. "Now." I logged in and saw my name plastered across a post shared dozens, maybe hundreds, of times already. So-called Powerball mom steals ticket meant for her son and daughter-in-law. Claims, entire $200 prize. Family devastated. My heart sank. There was a photo, one I didn't even know existed, of me standing outside the attorney's office earlier that week. The angle was low, grainy, but it was clearly me. The caption beneath it read, "Evelyn Brooks, 68, kept the entire jackpot for herself after promising to split it with family. Her daughter-in-law speaks out." I clicked through. There was Madison sitting on a couch I recognized. My couch. tearfully telling a local news affiliate that the lottery ticket was a shared family gift, that Nathan had bought it on behalf of all of us, and that I had promised to split any winnings evenly. She said she would help us pay off our mortgage. Madison sniffled. She said she'd finally make things right, but now she's cutting us out completely. We're just heartbroken. My stomach turned. I never made those promises. Not once. More posts followed, some from fake accounts, others from people I vaguely knew around town. They chimed in with comments like, "Greedy old woman and typical, raised her son with nothing and now she won't give him a dime." The hashtags made it worse. #Powerball mom. #lottery greed. #family first. I sat there staring at my screen, unable to move. How had this gotten out? Only a handful of people knew. Then I remembered something Edith once told me. Madison had a close friend who worked in a government building downtown. A secretary, I think, in some administrative office. It wouldn't take much for her to hear a rumor spot a familiar name and share it without a second thought. By noon, the news had spread across several platforms. My inbox was full of messages, some demanding explanations, others begging for money. I received a voicemail from a reporter asking for a statement, another from a lawyer representing concerned family members. I didn't respond. Instead, I shut off my phone, pulled the blinds, and sat on my couch. The same one from the photo. The same one where I had cradled Nathan after his first breakup, where Madison had once laughed watching holiday movies beside me before all this. I didn't cry. Not this time. But I did feel something darker, a deep soul-wrenching disappointment. I had kept silent because I wanted peace, because I believed in the dignity of moving forward without burning bridges. But they, Madison especially, had lit the match anyway. What hurt wasn't just the lies. It was how quickly people believed them. The same neighbors I had waved to for over a decade now avoided me in the grocery store. The clerk at the market barely made eye contact. Even Linda, my next-door neighbor, who I once drove to the hospital during her gallbladder attack, offered only a tight smile when we crossed paths that afternoon. I didn't defend myself. I didn't make a post or release a statement or show anyone the truth. Part of me wanted to, desperately. But another part, something steadier, held me back. I didn't need to prove my worth to people who were so eager to tear me down. Still, I wasn't alone. Edith, bless her, became my quiet shield. She started collecting screenshots, every post, every comment, every article that painted me as a villain. She saved Madison's video interviews, the Facebook posts full of false claims. She organized everything into folders: slander, speculation, financial misrepresentation. Just in case, she said, her voice calm but firm. She came over with tea one afternoon, set her laptop on the table, and walked me through it all. She wasn't angry for me. She was angry with me. Angry that people we once called family could turn so quickly. That kindness could be rewritten into selfishness with a few well-placed lies. "I've seen this before," she said. "Not the money necessarily, but the way women like you, quiet women, generous women, get rewritten when they stop saying yes." I looked at her, something raw building in my throat. It's like they never really saw me. Just the things I gave them. "That's exactly it," she said. "And now that you're saying no, they're acting like you betrayed them." I nodded slowly. Maybe silence wasn't always grace. Maybe sometimes silence was mistaken for guilt. I wasn't ashamed of what I had done. I hadn't stolen anything. I hadn't made false promises. The ticket was given to me. Tossed, really, without expectation. They had never seen its value, not really, and certainly not the value in me. I let them talk. I let them post. Because I knew something they didn't. Truth doesn't need to shout to be real. It simply waits. And soon it would speak for itself. It was the following Thursday when I got the message. I had just come back from the post office, my arms full of mail I didn't really want to open, and found a voicemail blinking on my phone. The voice was unmistakable. Deep, careful, and a little dry with age. It was Charles Ellison Madison's father. "Evelyn," he said, "I'd like to talk. If you're open to it. There's something I think you need to know." I stood in the kitchen holding the phone to my chest, stunned for a long moment. Charles was not a man of drama. Malem. In fact, I'd only met him a handful of times, at Jake's birthday parties, and one Christmas brunch where he'd sat quietly by the fireplace with his paperback while everyone else chatted. A retired history teacher, if I remembered correctly. Kind, private, and almost painfully observant. I hesitated, then called him back. He answered on the first ring. "I'd like to buy you a cup of coffee," he said. "There's a little cafe on 4th and Meadow. You'll like it. They don't rush you. Curiosity and something more tender. Perhaps a flicker of hope." Led me to say yes. I arrived early. The place was quaint, all brick walls and mismatched wooden tables, the kind of cafe where every mug had a story. Charles was already there, seated near the window, nursing a cup of black coffee with a notebook open beside him. "Evelyn," he said, standing. "Thank you for coming." I sat unsure what to expect. "I'll get to the point," he said. "I was at your house on Mother's Day." I blinked. I didn't come inside," he said, raising a hand. "I dropped by to return something Madison had left at my place. A set of photo albums she wanted for the cruise scrapbook. I got there just before dinner. Thought I'd just hand them off and go. But I parked across the street and waited a minute in the car. I'd just gotten a new camera. One of those fancy 4K things with a stabilizer. I'd been testing it out earlier that day and realized it was still rolling when I pulled up." He reached into his leather bag and pulled out a small digital camera. I saw them all heading into the house, and then I saw what happened on the porch. My heart started to race. Madison had the ticket. She pulled it out of her wallet like it was gum and said something to Nathan I couldn't hear. Then she turned to you, laughing, and literally tossed it at you, like a joke. I remember thinking, how rude. But I figured it was just their way. Later that night, I saw the recording and realized I had the whole thing. Clear audio, full view. He paused and took a sip of his coffee. I didn't plan to say anything. Wasn't my business. But then I saw Madison's post, then the news, then the story she gave that you promised to split the winnings, that it was a joint family purchase. Evelyn, I know that isn't true, and I can't let her rewrite it. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. "I'm not trying to start a war," he said softly. "But I am trying to write something before it spins too far out of control." He slid a flash drive across the table. "The video's on here," he said, "along with a written statement if it comes to that. I've already posted the clip on my own Facebook page, just now before you walked in. I said what I saw, that it was a gift, that there was no agreement, that you were as surprised as anyone when you won." I picked up the flash drive with trembling fingers. "I didn't expect this," I whispered. "From you." He gave a small smile. "Madison takes after her mother in a lot of ways. Some of them not great. I tried to raise her with empathy, but I suppose we all fall short in some way. Still, truth matters to me. And I don't like the way you've been dragged through the mud. For a while we just sat there in silence. The sun was coming through the window in soft waves. I looked down at the flash drive again and felt a deep, full breath fill my lungs. Later that afternoon, I opened my laptop. I wasn't sure if I was ready to watch it. But I did. There it was, in full color, Madison tossing the ticket like it was trash, her laugh loud and mocking. Nathan looking slightly uncomfortable but saying nothing. And me, standing there, caught off guard, taking it into my hand with a smile I had to force. Charles had narrated the moment in his post with precision. His caption read, "A gift is a gift." There was no promise, no agreement. I watched it with my own eyes. I believe Evelyn deserves her peace. And to my surprise, people began to listen. The video spread quickly, shared by others who had been sitting on the fence, unsure of what to believe. Former students of Charles chimed in vouching for his character. Friends of mine who had stayed silent finally commented with things like, "I knew there was more to the story and glad the truth is out. Even the local paper picked it up. This time the headline read, "New Evidence Clears Lottery Winner in Family Dispute." The narrative shifted. I wasn't the villain anymore. I wasn't the thief. I was the woman who had been mocked, dismissed, and still held her head high. Madison tried to push back, but her words no longer landed with the same weight. Her earlier videos were picked apart, inconsistencies highlighted. The internet has a way of remembering, and once the truth took root, it grew fast. Nathan never said a word. Not to me, not publicly. His silence said enough. That night I walked to the park near my house, the same path I used to take with Nathan when he was little. I sat on the same bench where we used to eat popsicles on warm days and watch the ducks glide across the pond. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. It wasn't just that the public saw the truth. It was that I had survived the storm without losing myself. I hadn't fought fire with fire. I hadn't lashed out. I'd held my ground and let time and quiet grace do the work. Charles had given me a gift far greater than that ticket ever could. He gave me back my dignity, my voice. And I knew as I sat there beneath the fading orange sky that no matter what came next, no matter who knocked at my door or what stories they tried to sell, I would never again allow myself to be made small in the name of family loyalty. Some truths need no defense. They simply endure. I never imagined I'd find myself preparing for a press conference at the state lottery office, but there I was, standing in front of my bedroom mirror, slipping into a soft gray suit I hadn't worn in years. It wasn't fancy, but it was elegant, understated, the kind of thing you wear when you want to be taken seriously but refuse to shout about it. I pinned a small silver brooch to the lapel, took one last look, and reminded myself to breathe. The call from the Lottery Commission had come 3 days earlier. They wanted to hold a press event. Nothing extravagant, just a formal announcement for the winner. They said I could decline, but it was tradition. Most winners made a public appearance, said a few words, shook a few hands. I had hesitated at first. After everything. After the lies, the headlines, the accusations, I wasn't sure I had the strength for more eyes on me. But then I thought of Charles, of the video, of Edith's steady hands collecting evidence, and I thought about the women watching from their quiet kitchens, from park benches, from nursing homes and office cubicles, wondering if standing tall still meant something in a world that rewards noise. So I agreed. The conference room was clean and bright with floor-to-ceiling windows and rows of chairs lined with cameras and journalists. A podium stood at the front, flanked by 2 banners displaying the lottery's logo, and a printed check so large it looked like a prop from a game show. The amount was printed in bold $200, $1,000. The moderator, a pleasant woman named Angela from the state office, smiled as I entered. "You look lovely," she whispered. "Thank you," I said, adjusting my blouse. "Let's get through this." As I walked toward the podium, I could feel the buzz in the room. The shuffling of papers, the clicking of pens, the murmurs of people wondering what I would say. Would I defend myself? Address the family scandal? Play the victim or the villain? Angela made the introductions. Then it was my turn. I stepped up to the microphone. Hands, steady gaze, calm. I looked out over the sea of eyes. Some curious, some skeptical, some quietly supportive. And I spoke. "My name is Evelyn Brooks." I began, my voice steady. "And I am the winner of this year's Powerball prize." The ticket was gifted to me on Mother's Day. I didn't ask for it. I didn't expect it. But I received it. I paused, letting the silence settle before continuing. There was no agreement, no conversation about splitting the winnings, no promises made. It was quite simply a gift. I didn't elaborate. I didn't point fingers. I didn't bring up Madison or Nathan or the media circus that had grown around them. I said what needed to be said. Nothing more. Reporters raised their hands, but Angela had warned me I could choose to answer or not. I gave one nod to a journalist in the front row. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, "given the recent viral video and your daughter-in-law's interviews, Do you have any plans to respond or take legal action? I smiled politely. My response is this moment. The truth doesn't need to fight for attention. It stands on its own. Another hand shot up. Do you feel vindicated by the public's support now that the video has surfaced? I looked around the room, then back at the podium. This isn't about winning support. It's about holding on to who you are, even when people try to tell the world you're someone else. Just as I was about to step away, a commotion erupted at the back of the room. The crowd parted, and I saw her. Madison, storming forward, eyes blazing, phone in hand. She was shouting before she even reached the front. "This isn't right," she screamed. "You said you'd share it. You told us you'd help with the house. Don't stand up there and lie to everyone." Security moved quickly, blocking her path as she tried to push forward. Reporters began snapping photos. The room buzzed with tension. Phones lifted whispers crackling through the air like static. I turned to face her, my heart surprisingly still. "Madison," I said softly so that only those near the front could hear. "This isn't the moment to break your silence. It's the moment to listen." She froze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scold her. I just held her gaze steady and unflinching. "This didn't have to be ugly," I continued. "But you chose this path, and now you have to live with the echoes of your own words." The room was silent again. Not because I demanded it, but because the weight of the truth had landed. Madison turned, still fuming, and stormed out. The security guard followed her to the hallway. Angela stepped up gently beside me. "Would you like to continue?" she whispered. I looked out at the room again. "No," I said. "I think that's enough." I left the podium, the cameras still flashing, and walked toward the exit. Outside, the breeze had picked up. It brushed against my cheeks, cool and calming. I stood by the entrance for a moment, watching the clouds shift above the city skyline. A young woman approached me quietly. I didn't recognize her. She looked like she might be a journalist, but she didn't hold a notebook. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to say thank you. My mom's been going through something similar with my brother. You made her feel seen." I smiled, and for the first time in days, it reached my eyes. "Tell her she's not alone," I said. And I meant it. I walked to the car, not as the woman people whispered about, not as a headline, not as the source of family gossip, but as someone who had come through the fire without letting it turn her into ashes. Let them talk. Let them twist. Because I had said what mattered. And sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strength dressed in grace. It was exactly 1 week after the press conference when I heard the knock at my door. Not the casual, polite kind. This one was hesitant, uncertain. 3 uneven taps followed by silence. I had just finished folding laundry, the smell of lavender from the dryer sheets still clinging to my sleeves. I walked to the door and opened it slowly, half expecting a reporter or another neighbor wanting to check in. But it wasn't any of them. It was Nathan. I hadn't seen him in person since the night of the dinner. Since the moment he tossed that lottery ticket across the table like it meant nothing, like I meant nothing. And now he stood in front of me looking like someone I barely recognized. He had lost weight. His skin was pale, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. The confident, slightly aloof posture he always carried was gone. His shoulders slumped. His hands trembled as he stuffed them into his coat pockets. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice low. I stepped back without a word, letting the door open just wide enough for him to step inside. He didn't wait for an invitation. He walked in slowly, glancing around the room like he hadn't seen it in years. Maybe in a way he hadn't. I sat down in my chair by the window. He remained standing, then eventually lowered himself onto the edge of the couch. He looked down at his hands, avoiding my eyes. "I'm sorry," he said finally. I waited. I didn't come here to defend Madison. I know what she did. And I didn't stop her. I didn't stop a lot of things. That's on me. Still, I said nothing. He cleared his throat. "The company's gone. We tried to hold on, but the last investor pulled out. We missed 2 mortgage payments and the banks filed foreclosure. We're in over our heads. I didn't know how bad it was until this morning. Madison's thinking of leaving. Says I've failed her. He looked up at me, then eyes glassy. We're drowning, Mom. I need help. I need a reset. Just enough to start again. 2 million would buy us time. I can rebuild. You know I can. 2 million. It rolled off his tongue like it was nothing, like it wasn't more than I had earned in my entire lifetime before the lottery. Like he didn't understand what asking that meant. Or maybe he did and just didn't care. I know what you're thinking, he said quickly, that I only came here because I'm desperate. And maybe that's true. But I'm still your son. I made mistakes, but I'm here now. I'm asking. Please. I stood slowly, walked to the side table near the stairs, and picked up an envelope I had placed there earlier that morning. I had a feeling. Not because I was hoping for this moment, but because I knew my son well enough to understand what happens when the world starts to close in around him. He looks for the easiest escape. I walked back and handed it to him without a word. His hands moved quickly like he expected to see a check. I watched his expression shift as he unfolded the paper inside. It wasn't money. It was a photo. A photo of the Powerball ticket, the numbers clearly visible, and a single handwritten note below it. This was your gift. And your lesson. He looked up at me, confused. I don't understand. I met his eyes calmly. You gave me that ticket, I said, voice steady. You didn't mean it to matter. But it did. Not because it was lucky. Because it showed me something I needed to see. He blinked, still not comprehending. I gave and gave for years, I continued. Every birthday, every emergency, every time you forgot to say thank you. I told myself it was what mothers do, that love is sacrifice. But what I didn't see, what that ticket finally made me understand, is that sacrifice without respect isn't love, it's erasure. He shifted uncomfortably. You didn't just take from me financially, I said. You chipped away at who I was. You made me feel like a backup plan, like background noise. And when I finally had something unplanned, something remarkable, you tried to rewrite it as yours. Madison weaponized the story, but you let her. You stood there while the world thought I was a thief. He lowered his gaze. I'm not angry, I said. Not anymore. Anger passed. What's left is clarity. He folded the paper slowly, his hands stiff. Do you hate me? He asked quietly. I shook my head. No. I don't hate you. But I don't trust you. And I don't owe you anything anymore. He sat in silence, that truth settling around him like dust in sunlight. I thought maybe you'd want to help. Not for me, but for Jake. He's still your grandson. That name cracked something in me. Jake? Sweet, innocent Jake caught between 2 adults who'd forgotten how to protect anything but their pride. I sighed. My love for Jake doesn't come with a price tag, but my forgiveness isn't for sale either. He stood slowly, folding the envelope and placing it on the table. I guess I deserved that. I didn't reply. He walked to the door, paused, and looked back one last time. Take care of yourself, Mom. And then he was gone. I closed the door gently behind him, leaned against it, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. No tears, no screaming, no drama. Just the quiet ache of a chapter closing. I walked back to my chair by the window and watched the wind stir the trees outside. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was the space I needed to begin again. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing at all, and let silence speak the truth that words never could. I left the city quietly without ceremony or goodbye dinners or social media posts marking the moment. There were no moving trucks with big logos, no neighbors waving from driveways. Just me and a single suitcase in the back of a rented SUV winding my way through back roads and highways until the familiar skyline faded from my rearview mirror. Vermont had always lived in the corner of my mind like a dream. I'd seen photos, green hills, long winters, wraparound porches, towns where people still waved at each other without needing to know why. I didn't know a soul there, and that was the point. I didn't want to run into anyone who remembered the version of me I was trying to let go of. I bought a house on a hillside just outside Brattleboro. It wasn't grand, but it didn't need to be. A modest 2-bedroom with wide plank floors and a fireplace that crackled like something out of an old storybook. The windows looked out over the valley, and on quiet mornings you could hear the wind in the trees before you even opened the door. It was mine, every inch of it. Paid in full. No mortgage, no strings, no one else's name on the mailbox. The first few weeks were a blur of fresh air and unpacked boxes. I filled the kitchen with chipped ceramic mugs from local shops, hung thrift store paintings on the walls, and grew herbs in little pots by the window. There was a softness to the days, a rhythm I hadn't known I'd been missing. I slept with the windows cracked open, even in the early chill of fall. I read books in the sun, and walked the long gravel road to the general store just for the sake of hearing another voice. And slowly, something inside me settled. But peace, I learned, wasn't the same as stillness. There was something stirring. An urge to take this gift, this strange, unexpected fortune, and shape it into something that would last longer than my own story. It started with a letter, handwritten, 3 pages long, from a woman named Marion in Indiana. She had read about me. Not the headlines, not the clickbait. The real story. After Charles's video and the press conference, she said she saw me on the news, and it felt like someone had cracked a window in her own suffocating life. Her children hadn't spoken to her in years. Her Social Security check barely covered rent. She lived in a trailer behind a church and spent holidays alone. She wrote, "I just want to feel like I mattered, like I wasn't only valuable when I was giving something." I cried reading it. And then I got to work. I called Grant, my lawyer, and we spent weeks mapping out a plan. Not just donations or scholarships or one-time aid. I wanted something rooted, ongoing, with a name that honored the forgotten, the dismissed. The women like me and Marion and hundreds of others who had been quietly pushed to the edges of their own families' lives. We called it the Last Place First Foundation. The mission was simple: to support older women who had been abandoned, sidelined, or left behind. Women who had poured their love and labor into others for decades only to be repaid with silence. We would provide emergency housing assistance, legal advocacy, emotional counseling, and monthly stipends for basic dignity. We'd partner with local organizations, hire case managers who knew the terrain, and make the foundation a place where no one had to explain why they were heartbroken. We already knew. I rented a small office in town. Just a single room with 2 desks, a coffee maker, and a chair that rocked gently if you leaned back too far. On the far wall I hung a shadow box frame. Inside it sat a photo of the Powerball ticket. Not the real one. That was locked away for safekeeping. But a print I had made, aged and softened to look like something from another life. Beneath it, etched on a brass plaque, were the words, "Not every gift is precious." But some lessons are priceless. Every woman who came into that space noticed it. Some laughed, others cried. A few just stared and nodded slowly, like they understood something they hadn't had words for until that moment. One day a woman named Judith came in with a black eye and a manila folder full of court papers. Her daughter had left her in the care of an abusive boyfriend while she went to find herself abroad. Judith had no savings, no options, but she had courage. We found her a safe place to stay, helped her apply for assistance, sat with her while she cried into a paper cup of lukewarm tea. Before she left, she turned to me and said, "I thought I was the only one." "You're not," I said. The foundation grew faster than I expected. We received grants, small donations from strangers, volunteers who had lived similar stories. Edith helped remotely from back home, coordinating social media updates and organizing fundraiser ideas. Even Charles sent a monthly check tucked inside a card with a typed note. I didn't hear from Nathan again, not after that day on the porch. Madison had gone quiet too. For all I knew, they were still spinning their story somewhere, hoping someone would believe it. But here in my little hilltop home, I was no longer part of that narrative. This was my new life. Every morning I lit a candle in the office, just one, a ritual, a reminder. I'd sit at the desk, sip my tea, and read letters from women across the country. Women who, like me, had learned the hard way that love without respect is a prison, but also that healing is possible. Not fast, not easy, but real. I planted flowers outside the foundation door. Daffodils and lavender. Things that bloom late but strong. And I smiled more. Not the polite keep-it-together kind, but the kind that starts in the chest and makes its way to your eyes. I had been given a gift. Not the money, the moment. The choice to stop living like my worth was conditional. To walk away not in anger, but in truth. To say I was last, and now I am first. It was a small building tucked between a shuttered bookstore and a feed supply shop. A brick structure with oil-stained floors and faded lettering above the bay doors that read Brooks Automotive. It had sat empty for nearly a decade, abandoned after the last owner passed away. Most people in town had stopped noticing it altogether, but I noticed it every time I drove by. Daniel used to love old cars, not the flashy kind, not the kind you show off at parades or polish to look untouched. He liked the ones with stories, scratched paint rattling engines, odd knobs, and mismatched floor mats. He said you could tell a man's soul by how he treated an old engine. He'd fix them up in our garage back in Illinois, a wrench in one hand and a coffee in the other, soft jazz humming from the radio. After he passed, I packed away his tools. I told myself I didn't know the first thing about engines, that it was his thing, not mine. But truthfully, I was scared of touching something that still smelled like him. And yet years later, in a quiet Vermont town where no one knew what I'd been through, I found myself staring at that old garage with a kind of longing I couldn't explain. So I bought it. It didn't take much. A few inspections, some cleaning, and 3 local mechanics who thought I'd lost my mind but were too kind to say it out loud. I'm not looking to compete with the dealerships I told them on our first day. I just want to bring old things back to life. Things people forgot they loved. They got it. Maybe more than they said. We painted the walls a soft slate blue. I hung Daniel's framed sketches over the tool benches. He used to doodle cars on napkins during dinner. We brought in an espresso machine that none of us really knew how to use but kept around for the smell. By the end of the first month, we had 5 jobs in the books: a rusty '65 Mustang, a cherry red VW Beetle, and a Dodge truck that coughed like a lifetime smoker but still had heart. I didn't work the heavy tools. That was their world. But I swept the floors, handled the books, stocked the vending machine, and learned to spot the difference between an alternator problem and a bad belt. I sat at the front desk, welcomed every customer like an old friend, and laughed more than I had in years. People started calling me Ms. Evelyn. Some didn't even know I was the woman from the lottery story, and that was fine with me. Because here I wasn't the mom who got betrayed. I wasn't the scandal. I wasn't a symbol of revenge or resilience or headlines. I was just me. After work, I'd take long walks through the neighborhood, sometimes past the bakery, sometimes to the little bridge by the creek. I'd wave to dogs behind fences and watch kids draw hopscotch squares on the sidewalk. I'd stop to admire the way light fell through the trees, golden and dappled like something from a forgotten dream. I still got calls. Every few weeks, the phone would buzz with a number I hadn't saved, but recognized all the same. Sometimes it was Madison, sometimes Nathan, sometimes blocked, sometimes local, sometimes from area codes that followed me like old shadows. I never answered. I didn't block them either. I just let the phone ring. Because I wasn't angry anymore. And I didn't need apologies wrapped in guilt or desperation. I didn't need explanations or promises or those thin, breaking voices that only appeared when money dried up and bridges burned. What I had now was better than closure. I had peace. The kind of peace that doesn't ask for permission, that shows up quietly, moves into your ribs, and makes a home. The kind that smells like engine grease and lavender, like firewood in the fall and muffins from the bakery down the street. I didn't need their forgiveness. And I didn't need to offer mine. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to hear the words, "I'm sorry," from someone who never learned how to say it. And while they wait, life moves past them. I chose not to wait. I chose to live. To wake up in the morning with sore hands and a full calendar. To learn how to grow tomatoes. To write postcards to women in the foundation and tell them they matter. To play piano again even though my fingers stumbled over the keys. To sit on my porch in the evenings with a blanket over my knees and a heart that beat steadily. Not from fear, not from regret, but from contentment. One afternoon, I found an old Polaroid tucked in the back of a drawer at the shop. It was Daniel standing beside a '57 Chevy, grinning with grease on his cheeks and sunlight in his hair. I pinned it to the corkboard near the front window. Customers smiled when they saw it. "That your husband?" one of them asked. "Yes," I said softly. He'd have loved this place, and I knew wherever he was he did. Years from now, no one will remember the headlines, the video, the press conference, the screaming. But maybe they'll remember the little garage on Maple Street, the woman who served coffee in chipped mugs and kept fresh flowers on the counter, the shop that brought old things back to life, and maybe, just maybe, they'll remember that quiet doesn't mean weak, that dignity doesn't need an audience, that healing doesn't come with fireworks, but with stillness, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply not needing one. If this story touched something deep inside you, maybe a memory, maybe a quiet ache, you're not alone. Have you ever been dismissed only to discover your strength in silence? Have you ever been pushed aside by the very people you once would have done anything for? Evelyn's journey reminds us that dignity doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it only needs to walk away. If you felt seen, heard, or inspired by this story, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next powerful story of healing, quiet strength, and redemption. Because here, every story reminds us you still matter. You always did.